Hello and welcome to the launch of the WPP BAV Best Countries 2023-4 study. My name is David Roth and I'm the CEO of the store WPP and chairman of BAV. This year's study is our most comprehensive yet. I'm in our studio in London, but throughout this broadcast we'll be travelling around the world virtually to hear from WPP experts and to analyse the movements we see in this year's study. The Best Countries study is now in its 8th year, and I'll be reflecting with my guests on the challenges that the world and business face, and how countries are seen in this complex and fast-changing world. The attitude of global business leaders, opinion formers and citizens towards a nation's strength has changed over the past 8 years since the study began. And we'll be looking at how these challenges and changing values have impacted overall perceptions of the 87 countries included in this year's study. As we take this journey together, I'll be talking to experts who'll give us contextual insights to help us frame the findings, economic and social. But you can also hear more from our experts, as well as find out more about the study and explore the data in our WPP BAV Best Countries Metaverse Experience at this link. The next hour promises to be informative, challenging and stimulating. So, let's get started. Well, I'm absolutely delighted now to be joined by John and Divier from our BAV at WPP team. John, Divier, thanks very much indeed for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, David. Happy to be here.
John, you're the person who's responsible for Best Countries at our BAV at WPP team. So maybe we'll start with you, John. First of all, why do we look at country brands?
First, I'd like to begin by saying country branding as a concept is not new, but measuring it is. And at BAV at WPP, we have two of the largest studies in the world in this realm. There is a close relationship between how people feel about a country and its brands, or put very simply, strong countries fuel strong brands and vice versa. And it's important for tourism, it's important for driving business, and it's important for brands which can lean into their country of origin. In terms of the model itself, every year we have different numbers of countries. This year, 87.
I mean, John, that's an important point, isn't it? Because it's not a random selection of countries. There's a strict criteria for countries to be eligible to be in the study.
But it is a very unbiased, rational approach we use in partnership with our partners. There's 4 set criteria a country has to pass to make it to the study. Together, brands which pass all 4 criteria enter into our study. And as said, there's 87 this year, spanning 95.2% of GDP per capita of the world and 79.4% of the world's population. So every single region of the world is covered in our study.
Well, perhaps, Divier, you can help us understand a little bit about, I suppose, the relationship between a country and a brand.
Yes, absolutely. So Best Countries has taught us something so important, which is that consumer brands and country brands are intricately connected, right? Consumer brands often reflect the cultural identity and the values of a country. So, for example, we all know Chanel. It's a high-end fashion brand, and it reflects the chic and sophisticated image that's often associated with France, right? Just like, Alibaba is a major player in the global e-commerce market, and that as a brand symbolizes China's dominance and innovation in the digital economy, right? We look at the power of brands that are being made in or come from a specific country. And since we know that brands are linked to the country in which they come from, it's important for us to understand this relationship. If a country is is perceived to have high quality products or has a strong heritage to it or is known for good ethics, this could then, lean into the positive perceptions that we might have as for brands from a specific country. At the same time, if a country is considered to have quality concerns or issues with labor practices or poor political connections, then that could also have something to do with our perceptions of brands. And we found in our study this year that 77% of consumers, they believe that the country that a product is made in impacts the preference to purchase it. So this is a huge stat to consider when understanding the impact and the power around brands that are made in.
The important to add, laddering off what Divya said, is we think about strong countries fueling brands, but remember many countries have only been created in our minds through the lens of brand. For example, I've never seen personally German tourism advertising. Maybe I've missed out, but I'm aware of their German brands. That shapes my perception of Germany.
So Divya, given the importance of made in, can we, through the best countries data, explore that by sector?
Yes, absolutely. One of the really cool aspects about our study is that we can evaluate the perception of made in by sector. We have 10 sectors across industries, including spirits and automobiles, healthcare, clothing, financial services. So not only can we understand the preference for goods from between country to country, but we can actually look into a specific country and understand the preference of goods across sectors.
Well, the two of you, together with Ignacio, have pulled together some of the key observational insights from this year's study. So perhaps we can take a quick look at what those are.
We found that cultural influence plays a significant role in both tourism as well as business investment, and it continues to be the number one driver. Another insight we found from our study this year is around consumer brands and how they can help shape a country's culture. Right? People tend to buy products as an opportunity for self-expression, to convey aspects of their identity or based on their set of values or their lifestyle. So in the same wavelength, people can be proud to own a product that's from a specific country. Another great example is Samsung from South Korea. Samsung has basically pioneered, global tech trends. And so South Korea in our study it gets credit for being one of the leaders in technology. So
I think that's a really good example of a brand that has really transformed not just its own fortunes, but the perceptions of the country that it comes from.
Yes, another insight we found this year is the need for countries to stand out and become more entrepreneurial has actually increased. We've got various supporting evidence for this insight. The first one is, as a driver of GDP, entrepreneurship has reclaimed the top spot in 2023. But perhaps more importantly, there's a dimension we call movers, which is about a country's differentiation, its energy, its dynamism, which surrounds its economy. That factor we call movers has significantly gained also with being entrepreneurial, and that's up 9%. Earlier on, I mentioned how soft power drives the GDP and outranks banks and tax traditional power, but it is starting to soften as inflation bites. There's an intricate balance between focusing on purpose, the environment, but also the ability for consumers to buy products. This is on something we've explored on BAV to look at how can a brand still be seen as good value, but offer more. If you just erode your price, you will damage your brand.
Well, thank you very much indeed for all of the insights and the context to why we measure brands and the way in which we do it. Divya and John, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hi there. I wanted to talk about Brand America today, and how seems thing very divided and polarized, but maybe we're not as divided as we think. And I was curious about exploring that with our great data from the Best Country Study with U.S. News and World Report and Wharton School of Business that we work on each year. So we explored this topic to see if in fact America was becoming more divided. And I think that we've always liked to take sides. In the 70s, it was disco or rock. It's fraternities and sororities against each other. It's, everybody chooses a team. It's Red Sox versus Yankees. It's political affiliation. I think we thrive on taking a side and competing and debating, and that's okay. But has it become more extreme? I looked at brand asset valuator data, and from a BAV study, we look at media brands, and I was curious about how have media brands changed, because they are influencing how we think and talk and behave, and fake news and real news and all those things. And if you look at Republicans 10 years ago, how they saw media, you saw that Fox News was a trusted source 10 years ago, and a decade later, it's still a trusted source among Republicans. CNN was fairly trusted 10 years ago, but today the Republicans don't trust CNN at all. And if you flip that and you look at Democrats, they trusted Fox News a decade ago, not today. At the same time, CNN has grown in trust. So we can see that the media is polarizing, becoming more polarized, and maybe we're only leaning more into that desperate media and we only see one side of the story. But we definitely see that the media is becoming more fragmented in terms of left versus right consumers. Looking at best countries data, we could also look at how we're seen around the world. Are we polarized globally? Do we see ourselves consistently in the US even? So just did a little digging there to see what we found. And again, my hunch would be that we are becoming more polarized like the media brand says, but let's check it out. So I looked at personality and values and traits that people around the world and in the US rate as important and part of our country. Diversity, climate change, topics and values and emotions and so on, to look at how people are and are we similar or different from one another, and how are we seen globally. So first, just looking at Brand USA globally, are we consistently strong, or do some people love us and some people hate us, or so that's the kind of thing I looked at here. And you can look at which countries are consistently strong, but maybe inconsistent. And probably not a big surprise, but globally, when we ask people to rate Brand USA, it is among the most consistently strong nations as how the rest of the world sees us. So perhaps we have a consistent view of who we are around the world today, so which was interesting. And then the other nations are more polarizing, as you could see, and not surprising as well. But what we are seen as consistently strong on, it has to do with economic influence, strong military, well-connected, strong brands, strong political influence, strong entrepreneurial, progressive mindset leaders, sure. Less so on those purposeful things about being conscientious, but we're definitely getting credit for being a powerhouse nation in a sense, consistently around the world. Looking at our self-perspective, how do we as Americans see each other? I looked at left-leaning versus right-leaning, and we do see about 50%, 49% to be exact, of the things we measure a nation on and values on of Americans are pretty consistent. We all believe in a strong military, committed to social justice, religious freedom. We see our nation as well-connected and influential. But we also see the other half, 51% differences between Democrats and Republicans, between left-leaning and right-leaning, who definitely have different perspectives of what our nation is about. So we are seeing a bit of a polarization in terms of how Americans see Brand USA, which was kind of interesting and probably not surprising. But I would say overall, we're consistently strong around the world. This is a global rating of Brand USA. And again, we said consistently strong. We're strong on power, agility, being an entrepreneurial nation, cultural influence. And that's really where our strengths lie. Less so about being socially purposeful. The top 19 out of 86 brands or so, countries. So on the strong end, but then we start to soften after that. So it's really about our power and strength and economic influence is what makes us consistently seen. Less consistent in other places, other things to work on to bring some more balance and global influence to the U.S. Hopefully you found that helpful. I appreciate your time. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Well, now it's time to see the WPP BAV Best Countries 2023-4 Countdown.
Hello from Brazil. It is a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit more about how the country is positioned in the best countries rank from WPP BAV. Well, we are in the 28th, more or less the same position over the last years. Brazil is one of the largest economies in the world, generally ranked among the 10 largest. If you look at the importance of the economic performance, we should be better positioned. However, we need to understand that Brazil is a developing country and therefore has aspects that are very evolved and others that are not so much. Understanding Brazil means understanding its continental dimension and the difference between the regions. For example, São Paulo is still responsible for around 30% of the country's GDP. Regions such as Northeast have been growing faster more recently, as has the Central West region, which is heavily based on commodities. Diversity is big, but inequality is even bigger. In the last 4 years, we have missed great opportunities for change and building Brazil's image. The current government, as far as we understand, intends to simplify tax issues and other much-needed reforms to create a more favorable business environment. It also aims to capture the opportunities that exist in environmental and clean energy arenas. Brazil has a large window of opportunity in front of it in terms of being one of the best players in green economy. If the evolution is confirmed, I understand that the country's image will improve as a whole. The vision that Brazilians have of their own country is better than the global vision. Knowing how to enhance this image abroad is very important so the country, which have a lot of complexities, can be better understood. Awareness could matter. At the same time, the country needs to evolve in fundamental issues. Walk the talk and build proof points where this image will be anchored are the biggest challenges.
Well, I'm delighted now to be joined on this broadcast by Hannah Harrison, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of WPP. Hannah, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, Hannah, one of the intriguing things about looking through the best countries study for this year is we find that right across the world, climate change is amazingly accepted, which I think is a really good thing. But when we start to look at the dimensions that people talk about in terms of their willingness to pay for it, especially in the West, we see that that is not as high as those people that accept climate change. Does that sort of surprise you?
I don't think that gap between acceptance and action surprises me. I maybe question the word willingness and look at whether it's about an ability to pay more, because I think around the world, particularly in the West, as you say, we're facing high inflation. Consumers are feeling lots of pressures across the board, and that's leading to a choice paradox as people are trying to choose or having to choose between cost on the one hand and conscience on the other as they try and make less money go further. And so what we're seeing is that that's leading to a rise in the value action gap, a gap between intention and action. And Kantar's latest research said that, around the world, 97% of people say they want to live a more sustainable life, but only 13% are actively changing their behaviour to do so.
And indeed, I know you referenced the Kantar study, but I think they actually quantify what that action gap is and what, in terms of the size of the prize to unlock that opportunity.
Yeah, so they think that for CPG alone, for FMCG alone, $991 billion a year is on the table if we can help close that gap.
What do you think the opportunities are, and what should brands do?
We've got to find a way of telling those stories so that they resonate, so that we're telling the stories that people want to hear. And that's incredibly important because there's quite a lot of cynicism about the motivations for corporate action around sustainability. And that's leading to a sense of misinformation and a rise in focus on greenwashing. I would love to see us focus more on the movable middle instead of focusing sustainability claims towards eco-active consumers who are highly motivated by those. And that, I think, will help us really hone in on the triggers driving that value action gap. So price point, convenience, accessibility, and help us shift ingrained habits. And then the second opportunity is around communication. I think we need to lean into that trust deficit that's leading to concerns around greenwashing. And we need to focus on credible, creative, actionable communications.
What should companies do in order to make sure that their impact on the environment is reduced?
I think the focus needs to shift and is shifting beyond purpose and sustainability as a marketing platform and towards sustainability as a business transformation opportunity. How do we embed this in everything that we do every day? How do we make sure that we're giving the right people decision useful data at the right time, and making this part of hardwiring this into the way businesses set budgets, the way they make strategic decisions, and holding people accountable. And I think we're starting to see that across the marketing community. There was some interesting research from Deloitte earlier this year that looked at how CMOs are focusing investment on internal initiatives that to help lead by example. So a less focus on shifting the dial on consumer behavior, much more focused on internal sustainability practices, redesigning products and service offerings, establishing long-term sustainability commitments in the day-to-day of marketing activity. And I think that's really positive. We're starting to see businesses walk the talk. And I do think actions speak much louder than words.
Hannah Harrison, the Chief Sustainability Officer of WPP, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, my name is João Maria and I'm head of BAV at WPP Portugal. I'm glad to be with you. Portugal is a country that relies heavily in tourism for investment and increasingly in its export effort. It's not an easy task, but again, nobody said that life was fair. In Best Countries 23-24, Portugal's overall ranking is 25th, which shows that the country is holding its position in such turbulent times, and in itself that is great. But I took particular notice about two sub-rankings: quality of life, where the country also ranks 25th, and social purpose, where we rank in position 18. Now, I think that what explains this is the country, or better said, its people relational ability. Portugal is a country of relationships, and throughout times, this is the factor that sets it apart and gives it a disproportionate influence. BAV Best Country reflects it. Of course, Portugal ranks pretty well on factors such as adventure, 6th, or even in heritage, where we rank 11th. But quoting from memory, in a recent interview, Philippe Starck, the famous French design guru who moved to Portugal some years ago, stated something like this: "Of course, Portugal has beautiful beaches and great landscapes, but many other countries also do. So what really makes this country unique, in his view, is the fact that this is the last country where the people show and live every day with a sense of humanity." Thank you, well, the thank you is Philippe Starck's, not mine. So what I like about BAV Best Countries is its ability to encapsulate the nature of a given country from a global point of view in an accurate and relevant way. Sometimes it is truly surprising. For instance, this year we launched the ranks for more than 50 cities at global level. Lisbon is one of those cities. There is a popular saying, a popular anecdote, that states that Portugal is Lisbon and the rest is landscape. And again, Lisbon's highest scoring factors are its scenic power and its welcoming traits. So there you have it. Even in the city rankings, in this case, BAV Best Countries is able to portray a city as a metaphor of a country. So these are just a couple of reasons to love BAV Best Countries, as it is always surprising if one cares to relate it to reality. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Bye.
Well, I'm delighted to introduce our next guest, Hari Ramanathan, who is the CEO for South Asia, Southeast Asia and Japan for VMLY&R. Hari, it's an absolute pleasure and delight to welcome you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David. Absolute pleasure to be here.
We know the relationship between brands and countries now much better through the lens of the Best Country study. But how are consumer brands shaping culture in Asia?
The shaping of modern Asia has been done by the Asian conglomerates. And each of these conglomerates also have family brands, and they could be service brands, like in the space of telco or hospitality or aviation. Some of them have FMCG, but they've also shaped consumer behavior. So bringing in new product formats, bringing in new product sort of innovation, all of that, either bringing them from other markets by learning or creating them here and then making it ready for export is something that's also driven. And today, most of us carry, and I would say the influence of their culture is now spread beyond the home countries that they grew up in many cases. I would say the best example of this is probably the Korean brands. Most of us are advocated much more by Samsung and LG and brands like that. So a lot of the internet, high-speed mobile internet development done by SK Telecom, all of these are effects that we see. We may or may not realize the implications of that or the brands that bring them, but they're all a result of conglomerates from Asia.
To what extent now are those conglomerates flying the flag for their countries outside the countries as they embark on elements of internationalization?
A lot of these actually are companies that have taken over. So interestingly, there are not many stories, with the exception again of Korean conglomerates and the early 1980s sort of Japanese boom. Many of them have now preferred in the last decade and a half to take over brands of the countries that they are in. So it's interesting to see how they are representing their country, but by rescuing or in many cases resuscitating a brand that was already famous in the home country.
To what extent are those companies now looking at the way in which their brands can help redefine the way in which their country is seen?
If you compare it to 3 decades ago, the perception of Asia as the early factory of the world, which is largely populated with non-technology savvy people, it was backward in more than one sense, particularly when it came to technology. And that has today shifted entirely to Asia being seen as at the cutting edge of technology application in many cases, or even technology companies. I mean, most popular example of that is India and the amount of tech workforce that it generates. Philippines, for example, or even in places like Thailand, which is one of the first Asian countries to introduce 5G. China, of course, we don't have to say e-commerce, live commerce, all of this was invented in China. And behind all of this are these family companies. So they've the initiatives and the actions they've taken in order to develop their own business has resulted in Asia turning from being a very late laggard to actually an innovator.
Are we beginning to see a much more sort of politically aligned Asia, maybe as a formidable political bloc in the world?
I think the recent political conditions of polarization that sort of gripped the world, and increasingly also the geopolitical polarization between US and China, has reduced Asia acting as one, as both these powers try to influence and collect allies in Asia, therefore actually kind of splitting Asia more than uniting Asia.
What advice would you give to people who maybe haven't had a great deal of contact with the best countries BAV data? What's the best way to approach it? What's the best way to use it?
The mistake that many of us make, and I've made that in my early years too, is to look at it only when there's destination branding projects, which means when it's about countries. I think we underestimate the power of how much a country's brand perceptions can add to a brand. I think the second place where I've learned really to use this really well is when many of us deal with clients which have many of these best countries, the countries in the best country study as target markets. So how do you actually understand how that country is perceived and by itself as well as by its neighbors will actually help you create regional marketing strategies in order to say, how do you leverage what is strong about a particular culture, about a particular nation as a brand, and bring those qualities to the brand that you're bringing into it, whether you're exporting or importing into that market.
Well, Hari, great advice as ever. Hari Ramanathan, the CEO for South Asia, Southeast Asia and Japan for VML Y&R. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you, David. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mitch Dehali from London, one of the WPP agencies specializing in branding. Today, I want to talk about something that surprised me when I first learned about Japan's high rankings in entrepreneurship in the BAB country ranking survey. But as I dug deeper into Japan's history, I realized that this ranking is a result of Japan's long-standing tradition of fostering innovation and progress. Imagine this: Japan's ability to benchmark and improve upon existing ideas, a bit like how we learn from others, has deep roots in its history. Way back in the ancient cities of Nara and Kyoto, Japan borrowed ideas from China and Korea during those periods in 7th to 12th centuries. These ideas influenced various aspects of Japanese culture, including writing, architecture, religion, and even how they run things in the government. The history of learning and adapting laid the foundation for the culture that values innovation. That is a crucial trait for entrepreneurship today. Now, let's talk about how the Japanese language plays a role. The Japanese language has unique characteristics that emphasize the distinction between oneself and others. This encourages individual and self-awareness, which are perfect for entrepreneurs who need to think outside of the box and find a unique solution to problems. What's more, nearly everyone in Japan can read and write. This means they have a highly educated workforce, which is essential for any entrepreneurial venture. There is a special Japanese word kodawari, which doesn't translate directly, but it embodies the idea of pursuing personal values and creativity. That is something vital for entrepreneurial success. But it's not all roses in the world of Japanese business. There is a term we call big company disease, which refers to conservative organizations that are sometimes hesitant to embrace new ideas. Symptoms of this disease include poor communication, a focus on seniority over competence, resistance to new business ventures, and slow decision-making. Essentially, big organizations in Japan can sometimes move slowly and resist change due to their size and established positions. Now, here's what's fascinating. Japan's innovation often thrives in challenging situations like conservatism. The constraints of the conservative environment can spark innovation. Let me tell you the history of QR code in my own perspective. When the economic bubble burst, barcode businesses in Japan were in trouble. Amid this crisis, one of the engineers from Denso was given the task of creating a new market. But there wasn't much money to work with, so they couldn't invest in hardware development. Instead, they relied on their creativity and ideas to develop a code. They set a strict 2-year deadline because of the corporate world's impatience. In this conservative setting, individuals who were determined to make a difference and emerge as innovators. There are the people who can inspire innovation even in the most conservative environments. That is actually something unique in Japan. So what's the takeaway? Japanese entrepreneurial spirit is shaped by its rich history and culture. This history of learning and adapting, combined with a unique language that fosters individuality and a highly educated workforce, sets Japan apart in the global entrepreneurial landscape. Thanks to these deep-rooted elements, Japan has a unique ability to take ideas from elsewhere and make them even better. This adaptability and innovative spirit can be essential, especially when embracing and improving emerging technologies like generative AI. Japan's approach might not just be about adapting these technologies, but also refining and integrating them in ways that could lead to groundbreaking advancements. That could be potentially setting new global standards in technological innovation. Thanks for listening. That's my perspective. Hope it helps.
Findings from BAV Best Country. Middle Eastern countries have been on the rise since 2022 and have gained the most in our Best Countries study. Out of the top 10 countries that have gained the most in overall ranks since 2022, 4 out of the 10 are Middle Eastern, with Oman gaining most overall, plus 13, then Bahrain a plus 9, Qatar plus 3, and Saudi also a plus 3. One aspect where Middle Eastern countries shine the most is their increasing recognition being a mover. 4 out of 5 strongest countries can see up and coming and showing dynamism and uniqueness. It's a far cry from stereotypes that have plagued the region in the past. Some contextual highlights. To those paying attention to the region, this comes as no surprise, as the realization each country's unique long-term vision in recent years has empowered the countries in the Middle East to prove that they're more than just a group of homogeneous conservative royal states. For example, in recent years we've seen Qatar attempt to diversify away from oil to becoming a regional sports hub beyond just football. Saudi, historically one of the most conservative in the region, has opened to new social ideas, becoming one of the world's biggest investors in cultural tourism and gaming. With each country in the Middle East striving for their own ideal version of the future and more, in the coming years adapting to a one-size-fits-all approach to the region just won't cut it anymore. Brands will not only need to understand the unique trajectory of each market, but also address the country's distinct cultural nuances, societal, behavioural nuances that underpin their evolution. Whilst there are certain shared values, attitudes and beliefs across the Middle Eastern markets, for example collectivism, conservatism and a deep sense of pride for their cultural roots, the strongest brands in the Middle East are the ones that forgo the lowest common denominator approach and understand the nuances that make each market tick. It's those that understand music, humour, and what connects the people, the ones that can navigate the tensions and opportunities of bringing both old and new together, that will be successful.
Now, I'm absolutely thrilled to be delighted and joined by Professor David Rebstein, who is the Professor of Marketing at the Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania. But much more important to us, I think, than that Dave has been a partner with us on our journey on best countries from the very first idea. Dave, a very, very warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Delighted to be with you this morning, and recognize that I've been with this the entire way. And actually, I've been working on this project for a couple of years before we ever started doing this and actually collecting the data.
And I also think, David, looking back, I think you are the only person that's been on this project from the very beginning to where we are today. So I admire your tenacity.
It's everybody else gets promoted and moves on and does other interesting things. I'm sort of stuck in my space, and once a professor, always a professor. There's no place else I can go.
What has surprised you about the 2023-24 Best Countries study?
As I look at the span of the 8 years, there's been a lot of changes going on in the world. It actually gives the appearance that the world is very, very divided. And we see trade wars going on, we see treaties being formed and then later dissolved, crackdowns on the press, some social unrest. But what was interesting this year was actually seeing, while there are some areas of disagreement, there are also some areas where there's a lot of consensus and agreement.
And what about things like social media, David?
86% of those within China think of social media as this is a positive thing, helps disseminate some information. In contrast, there are countries like Australia, Finland, France, and in particular Denmark, that actually view social media as something negative, that it's addictive for kids, that it could lead to some political turmoil. And so there are some differences and disagreement about how useful social media is. While we see disagreements, there are things that people agree on. Climate as a serious threat to the world, almost everybody agrees on that. The lowest of any country was 80% viewed climate as a major threat to the world, whereas Indonesia, 98% of the respondents we have from Indonesia, as they watch the floodwaters rise, view climate as a major, major threat to the world.
And then healthcare, I suppose, that's one of those issues that clearly from a social perspective is phenomenally important and something we agree on upon as well.
So it's not just the existence of healthcare, it's that should there be universal healthcare, that countries just guaranteeing healthcare for all of their citizens. Again, that's something that almost everybody agrees with. There's quite a global consensus on that. One of the things that I think is another area of agreement is generally there are common perceptions about countries. That's not universally the case. We can find some exceptions, but generally there's some agreement. But if I had to look over the 8 years of our data, one of the things that I can observe is that images are relatively sticky. It's hard to change a perception of a country, although I will say it is easier to fall down in your overall image than it is to go up. And so to rise in the overall rankings, it can happen slowly, but to fall happens a little bit easier. There's one other thing that I think is really interesting, which is I think there's this halo effect. That if I think a country's strong on one dimension, I generalize it to other dimensions.
But how do you think best countries can be used in order to help and understand and course correct, maybe reposition brands?
The perceptions of the countries are directly related to the GDP of a country. And so countries could look at how we could change what it is that we're doing. And our rankings are totally based on the perceptions as they relate to the GDP of a country.
And to what extent are brands both, in a sense, a victim and benefit from the way in which the countries are seen from where those brands originate?
So there is tons of research that indicates that made in has an influence on whether people are willing to buy. I'm more willing to pay for a pair of shoes that come from Italy than I am from some other country. And I'm more willing to buy a bottle of wine from France. And so the image of a country affects our ability to sell those products. What's interesting is I think it goes the other way also, which is some products have an influence and some brands have an influence on the image of a country. So I think, for example, Qatar Air or Emirates Air absolutely has an impact on the perception of Qatar as a country or of the UAE.
Professor David Rebstein, Professor of Marketing, Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you, and I can't wait to see the new set of data.
Well, I'm afraid that's it for our whirlwind tour around the world and the world of the WPP BAV Best Countries study. A huge thanks to all of my guests for their insights, as well as the BAV at WPP team and our partners at Wharton Business School and US News. But of course, there's so much more to explore. You can watch the full interviews with our experts and discover many more insights on both the global and country level by downloading our Best Countries Metaverse experience on the link given here. And of course, if you're a WPP colleague, you can get access to all of the Best Countries data through the WPP platform, The Font. But from me, David Roth, thank you very much indeed for watching, and please do get in touch with any questions or comments you might have. Thank you very much indeed for watching.